Not even her dog. It's my dog! She's taking my dog!
On August 6, 1942, the U.S. 1st Marine Division looked on from their troop ship, the USS George F. Elliott, as it steamed into the waters north of Guadalcanal in the South Pacific Solomon Islands. The objective was the island's half-built airfield at Lunga Point. It was imperative that the airfield be taken before the Japanese could make it operational. With its use, the Japanese could bomb the shipping lanes to Australia, creating a stranglehold of the continent. Among the thousands of troops about to experience battle for the first time was one Marine from H Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, Sidney Phillips, who 6 decades later would be portrayed in the HBO series The Pacific. The following is Sid's real story, told by the man himself.
Here was a flag flying on the stern of every landing craft. I looked over the side at the flags, and my friend Carl Ransom was doing the same thing. You could see a whole line of them. It looked like they reached to the end of the world. I got a lump in my throat. Ransom did too. As he wiped his eyes, he said, "That salt spray makes your eyes water, don't it?" We had never had that happen before, never in training, and I never saw a U.S. flag on every landing craft happen again after that. They were too good a target. Our Colonel Cates, CEO of the 1st Marine Regiment, was a very patriotic Marine. If there was an order given to fly a flag on every landing craft, I'm sure Cates gave that order. I noticed that morning how everybody's cartridge belt was full and bulging. You could see the shiny brass cartridges here and there in the belt. You had 2 clips of 5 rounds in each of those pockets. When we had made practice landings in the Fiji Islands, they never issued any live ammunition. We made the landings with empty flat cartridge belts. They didn't want some idiot firing his rifle into someone. Things were different now. This was the real deal. When we came ashore at Guadalcanal, we were in that landing craft where the front end would drop down. We had the front ramp because otherwise we couldn't get that mortar out of the boat. We were expecting a life and death struggle with hand-to-hand combat on the beach. When the ramp went down, we found our guys on the beach laughing at us and opening coconuts. They had done the same thing a few minutes before. There were no enemy in our vicinity. The first day we struggled through the jungle to reach a hill called the Grassy Knoll, a mile inland. We had poor maps at Guadalcanal. They had maps drawn up by some Australians who had once been on the island. They even had the names mixed up for the Tenaru and Ilu rivers. So the mission was to go to the Grassy Knoll and get the high ground. The thing that stands out so clear in my memory was the incredible heat in the jungle with no breeze. And we had just come from winter in New Zealand, so it was a severe climate change. We just griped and complained, in that jungle it's so hot, and you're carrying a 60-pound pack when you come ashore. Extra ammunition, food for 4 days, a change of clothing, you drop your bedding, and keep going. The heat was so oppressive, we were issued 1 canteen. We'd been taught water discipline. You were only supposed to take small sips of water and roll the water around in your mouth before you swallowed. You were never supposed to guzzle it. Everybody nearly died of thirst that first day. We ate crackers and cans of hash. It just dried you out more and made you more thirsty. At the end of the first day, we were exhausted and only halfway up the Grassy Knoll. They told us to lie down where we were, dig a foxhole, shut up, and go to sleep. So we did. The first contact with the enemy was being strafed by enemy planes. The strafing never ended. They were always coming in, bombarding us. We considered that contact with the enemy. The day after we landed, we captured the airfield. When I first saw it, I was surprised that there weren't many buildings except for this pagoda-looking thing. That served as the tower. The runway wasn't very visible unless you were in the air. There were no wrecked Japanese planes. The place was empty. We went over there and looked at the pagoda. We were some of the first Americans to walk into that building. The first American planes we saw come in there were the B-17 Flying Fortresses, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. They would stop, refuel, and leave. The Flying Fortresses came in before we had any Navy or Marine planes. The Savo Sea battle on August 9th was like watching a summer storm from a beach. You would hear this rumble of naval gunfire and see what looked like flashes of lightning. You couldn't see any real details of the naval battle, but when a ship would blow up, we cheered. We assumed it was our boys doing the whipping. The next morning we saw one American cruiser creep slowly by, right offshore, with part of its bow blown off. Somebody said it was the Chicago. We were then told about the disaster. We lost 4 cruisers that night. You could maybe see a ship smoking 3 miles away. Our supply ships were still in the harbor, but they pulling out, leaving us. They hadn't even unloaded half our supplies, but they had to get the hell out of there. At that moment, we felt that we might be considered expendable. It had already occurred in the Philippines, Wake Island, and at Guam. The rifle platoons had daily patrols. 15 to 20 men would go out with an officer, scouting, trying to find out if there were any Japanese in a particular area. In the mortar platoon, we seldom went on patrols, but we did go out after a Marine patrol had been ambushed, and the survivors came back to our lines. They put together a 300-man patrol to go back out there to recover our dead. They wanted 181 millimeter mortar to come along, so they came to the mortar platoon and said, "Number 4 gun is going." That was me. Lieutenant Benny Benson, he was the lieutenant for our gun, went with us. The riflemen were on the point watching for the enemy. In the mortar squad, we trudged along behind them with that damn heavy stuff. We went about 5 miles out, carrying that mortar the whole way. You either carried part of the mortar or the ammunition. If you were an ammunition carrier, you carried a clover leaf of ammunition on your shoulder. It was a strenuous march in the tropics. There were no roads. To be on the ground in a dense jungle, you did not even need to seek combat to have a miserable time. You might have hiked way out and way back and had to ford several streams and walk through water waist deep where your clothes got soaked and your feet didn't dry out and your pants chafed your crotch. You just can't convey that misery in words. When we reached the area where the ambush had occurred, the mortar platoon stopped 150 yards from the site, set up our mortar. If the enemy were going to ambush this big patrol, we were going to give our guys mortar support. You could just look where our guys were and we would have fired beyond them. But the Japanese had vacated the area. We never did get up to the actual site of the ambush, but this old Marine sergeant came walking back. "What's the scoop up there?" "You don't want to see it," he replied. They brought our dead back on canvas stretchers, their bodies covered by ponchos. Our hatred for the enemy burned from early on. We had heard about the Bataan Death March, where they bayonet American prisoners who fell exhausted by the roadside. We had talked to the 90 millimeter anti-aircraft battery that was near our camp. They were a defense battalion that had been at Pearl Harbor. Then there was the Goichi Patrol. A few days after we landed on Guadalcanal, a Japanese prisoner told Colonel Frank Gucci that his buddies wanted to surrender 5 miles west of our lines, where the Matanacao River met the sea. Gucci took a patrol of 25 men out to take their surrender, but it was an ambush. Gucci and his men were slaughtered. Only 3 of them escaped by swimming back to our lines. Was he a fool for thinking the Japanese would surrender? No, we just didn't really understand the enemy yet. Surrender was out of the question for the Japanese unless he was unconscious or badly wounded. But even then, if you saw an unconscious one, you'd be very cautious because he might be only pretending. He might try to kill you. Japan soon proved a brutal enemy. They ignored the Geneva Convention. They tortured prisoners of war, then killed them. A hatred between the Marines and Japanese rapidly developed. We never took a prisoner, never in my battalion that I know of. On August 20th, word arrived that the Japanese were landing fresh troops to retake the airfield. It was late in the afternoon, and we were at our mortar position when we heard airplanes circling the field. We ran for cover. They came in from the south over those ridges. The roar of all the airplanes was deafening. They were loud by themselves, but more so when you have the sky full of them. Someone screamed that they were our planes. We just went wild. I looked up and saw a blue-gray SPD dive bomber with the letters USMC painted on the underside of the wing. We flung our helmets way up in the air. We were beating on each other. Some of the guys were crying with joy. They were so happy. We hadn't had any friendly planes except those 2 or 3 flying fortresses that came in. We had been strafed regularly by the Japanese. Seeing our planes told us that Uncle Sam had decided we were going to fight for this miserable island. The next mission was to take the high ground, referred to as the grassy knoll. Apart from constant strafing from enemy planes, There was still no contact with the Japanese the following day. The two navies battled it out during the Battle of the Savo Sea, resulting in the supply ships withdrawing from the area. Apart from an ambush where 22 Marines were killed after being lured in to accept the surrender of a group of Japanese soldiers, the first real conflict did not come for nearly 2 weeks. On August 21st, 1942, the Marines and the Japanese Army would meet in the first major battle of Guadalcanal. The Japanese had landed 900 men of the elite Ichiki detachment who marched west along the beach toward the airfield. The Marines of H Company waited for the enemy along the west bank of a small river they called Alligator Creek, or the Tenaru. Our lines ran north and south from the ocean back to where the airfield began. We did not have a perimeter around the airfield. We didn't have that many men. We were stretched out in these holes. Every 7 yards, 2 men with rifles, then maybe 6 men with a machine gun. Their position covered with logs and dirt. The jungle around you was so thick you didn't know who was where. You would lie there and listen to all those different damn jungle noises. One of those iguanas, 3 feet long, could be scurrying around, wrestling and making noise. You would wonder, is that the enemy or is that a lizard? So you stayed awake. You didn't want to give a false alarm. After a while, you would get used to it, and you began to take pride in the idea that you could tell a land crab from a creeping Japanese soldier. The mosquitoes were eating us alive. There was no repellent or anything. We just lay in those holes and fed those mosquitoes all night long. We'd been living on rice and nothing else for a long time there. Everybody was worn out. Every 2 hours, you were supposed to switch off on watch with the guy in your foxhole. We were always on edge. Because things were so spooky, they would take our squad leader, Sergeant Carp from Brooklyn, and put him up on the perimeter. He carried the Browning, and they wanted his firepower up there. Plus, he had been in the Marine Corps about 3 years and was an old-timer that they considered much wiser than us kids. They put him up on the perimeter every night. With that Browning, the Japanese unit had come marching down the beach, moving west, and when they got to the Tenaru River, they spread out and formed a front. Some of them waded through the creek quietly. It was black as dark. When they arrived, Sergeant Carp and his foxhole companion, a Marine named Beer, had fallen asleep. They were just so exhausted, so tired. A Japanese officer jumped in their hole and killed them both before someone shot him. When the firing started, the darkness became almost as bright as day. A wall of fire poured from our lines, a real roar. We knew the real enemy was here. They were disciplined and vicious. As the battle raged, our 81 millimeters mortar platoon, all 4 tubes, was facing the beach in case there was a landing coming in from the ocean. So the attack was coming from our right flank. Our lieutenant moved us toward the battle, up parallel to the river. Our foxholes were all over. Our machine guns were so well dug in, you could hardly see them at all in the dim light. As we moved up, we kept falling in foxholes. To fall in a foxhole with a mortar tube or base plate can be painful as hell. It could kill a man if it fell on him. There was a pile of Japanese dead right out in front of our new mortar position about 30 yards away. They had been killed before we got up there. We were trying to hit an area about the size of 6 football fields on the other side of the river. We just kept blanketing the whole area over there. We were firing heavy 15-pound shells. It is a deafening explosion when that thing goes off. You just can't believe it. If you shot the biggest firecracker ever, it was 1,000 times louder than that. We were actually awed by the results of that 15-pound shell. At Camp Lejeune, we had 1 day of firing live ammunition, but the range was over 2,000 yards away. We had never had any close-up firing until that battle. During the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Apollock, CO of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, came running over to our gun and said, "Who is the gunner here?" I held my hand up and he said, "Well, boy, use me as the range stakes." He ran out about 40 feet in front of the gun and held his hand up. I put the sights on 0 deflection, and we dragged the gun so that we had him lined up. Then I noticed beyond him through the trees was an abandoned American amphibian tank on the enemy side of the river. The Japanese had gotten a machine gun into that tank and were firing from inside it. Pollock said to try 300 yards. Our shot was right on, but it was a little bit beyond the target. We lowered our mortar down and our third round landed right in the tank. Everybody along the line cheered like a touchdown in a football game. The enemy then tried to pick us off with a 75 millimeter howitzer cannon they had wheeled up. It had iron wheels on it, and they drove us away from our mortar once. They also fired those knee mortars at us. When those things went off, it sounded like you had slapped two pieces of 2x4 together, a crack, and if it hit close, it would scare the hell out of you. General Vandergrift and his staff came right up behind our guns. Vandergrift was the top dog on Guadalcanal. He was within 10 feet of us. A corporal followed behind the general with a 12-gauge pump shotgun, and he kept the shotgun at port arms. I don't even know if it was on safety, but all he had to do was point that thing and fire it. He stayed right with the general, and that's when my buddy Ransom said, "Phillips, if you want to get your butt kicked, just go over there and stand between the general and that corporal." Our tanks didn't come up until maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. They passed right down the beach right there. You could have walked over and touched them. When the tanks got through, our whole 1st Battalion, A through D companies of infantry, had circled around from the south, and they came around and drove all the Japanese survivors ahead of them out into the ocean. About 30% of the enemy ran out and jumped in the surf. Everybody kept firing at them until no more heads were visible. After it was over, Colonel Pollock came over and told us we had done real well and shook hands with everybody. This Japanese unit that hit us there was half of the Ichiki detachment, an elite unit. They first went ashore at Guam and captured our Marines there. Evidently, they had gone through all the Marines' personal gear because the Japanese packs were full of snapshots of American people, Marines and their girlfriends. We found about 100 of these snapshots. After the battle, we collected up all the pictures of Americans and decided that the best thing to do was burn them. You wouldn't want to send them to the families, even if you could identify them. We kept all the Japanese pictures. You'd never burn them. You could trade them to sailors on board ships for almost anything. Clothes, chewing tobacco. Money had no value, but you could do a lot by trading souvenirs. I opened one pack that had 3 Marine globe and anchor emblems in it. My friend Deacon Tatum got stuck with Carp's BAR and had to clean his blood off of it.
Thanks for watching. If you have a thought about Sidney Phillips and his portrayal in the Pacific, drop a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, please hit those like and subscribe buttons.